Definition of a game changer. Someone who creates a new art movement, sets a new standard of accomplishment. An example is Leonardo da Vinci with the Mona Lisa, his iconic painting. He was the first of the artists of the High Renaissance. He's a game changer. A rebel is someone who comes along and upsets the apple cart, upsets the orderly progression of artistic improvement, causes a drastic style change, maybe even redefines art. And such a rebel was Andy Warhol with pop art. And who knew that this painting of a Brillo box would sell for $3 million? So we're going to see 6 game changers, 3 rebels. And what about the rest? Certainly not pedestrian. Let's call them evolutionists. And the definition of evolutionist is in this lecture's trivia question, which is, which National Football League teams played in the Ice Bowl of 1967? And the answer is Dallas at Green Bay. This was New Year's Eve, 1967. That's 15 degrees below zero, 47 degrees below freezing. Field was a little slippery. Now, some of you may have heard of Bart Starr. He was the Hall of Fame quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. In football terms, he was a game changer. Tom Brady with the Patriots was a game changer. Now, you may not have heard of Jerry Kramer. Jerry Kramer is a Hall of Fame offensive lineman. That's his number 64. He clears the way for the runner with the ball. How would you like to see that freight train bearing down on you? Which brings us to the Ice Bowl. It was the last play of the game. The Packers trailed, but they had the ball on the Dallas 1-yard line. It's the playoffs. If the Packers score, they win. If they don't, they go home. This is Bart Starr carrying the football. And he's got to get the football over this goal line here. And the person who wants to stop him is 260 pounds worth of Jethro Pugh. The key player in this drama, though, is Jerry Kramer, and you can see his number right there. And he's prepared to block Jethro Pugh. You've heard the expression moment of truth. Well, this has got to be the greatest moment of truth photograph you will ever see. It's right at the instant of the decisive play. And so the question is, does Jerry Kramer make the block? And the answer is yes. He stands up Jethro Pugh. Bart Starr follows him into the end zone. Packers win. Starr is the hero, but only because Jerry Kramer delivered. So in football terms, Bart Starr is the Hall of Fame game changer. Jerry Kramer is the Hall of Fame evolutionist. And in artistic terms, the evolutionists are artists in their own right who continue to raise the bar of excellence within their art movement. They all have unique talent and perspective. They contribute that to the growth of an existing art movement. An art movement is a historical convenience. It's usually named Dave Brueggemann, you're not muted. It's usually named after the fact. It's named retrospectively by critics, historians, and even other artists. Some artists may not know they're in an art movement. It might not have been named yet. There's no discrete beginning and end, and the movements can overlap and occur simultaneously. And some art movements influenced artists centuries into the future. Art in the Dark Ages, sometimes known as Byzantine art, precedes the art movements at which we will look. But let's just look at the style here. This is Madonna and Child. No perspective, not much drama, not much color. Now let's look at the progress of Byzantine art over the next 800 years. Not much. There's some color. It's perfunctory, but these artists were given no room for originality or self-expression. They endlessly copied the works of artists who came before them. And so that brings us to our first art movement, pre-Renaissance Italian. These are artists in Florence and Venice who started experimenting with light, emotion, depth, and dimension. And our first artist is our first game changer, Giotto di Bondone, and his masterpiece, The Lamentation of Christ. This is an iconic Christian event. Jesus has died on the cross. His friends and followers and family mourn his loss. The anguished angels in the sky, their movement balances the stillness down below. See the beginnings of perspective with that tree in the background. It's definitely a break from Byzantine art. Giotto has added light, he's added depth, he's added dignity. Moving forward 100 years, still in pre-Renaissance Italian, Friar Angelico has moved the bar. You can see this is the Annunciation. The event is the Archangel Gabriel telling Mary she will be the mother of God. And you can see now the figures are more lifelike. Colors are complementary. You can see perspective with these pillars and this open chamber. And typical of Annunciation paintings, we can see the Christian Holy Trinity. We see God the Father here, God the Son in Mary's womb, and God the Holy Spirit with a dove here. Right around 1400, we have an interesting confluence because Byzantine art is still alive and well. Pre-Renaissance Italian is maturing, and we start to get the beginning of the Rome Renaissance. And these artists grasped intellectual freedom. Their subjects were mainly biblical, historical, mythological, and the painters of the early Renaissance start with Jan van Eyck and his Arnolfini portrait. And this is all about wealth. You can see the garments, the drapery, chandelier. You see a double portrait with their reflections in this clock face. And some say that Giovanna is with child. The National Gallery in London, where this painting hangs, says she is not. It was common practice for wealthy women to emphasize their finery, and she is doing just that. You see that she has gathered her dress, lifting it to show the weight, the texture, the quality. You see she exposes the lining and the undergarment. Her facial features are remarkably reminiscent of the Virgin in Friar Angelico's painting just 2 years earlier. Another artist of the early Renaissance is Sandro Botticelli. This is Birth of Venus, sometimes called Venus on the half shell. And what doesn't get noticed is Botticelli's use of gold. It's in these roses, rosebuds and stems and shrubbery, the water, tree trunks, foliage, the lines of the shell, and even the breakers underneath. And the effect of these touches of gold is that this painting would shimmer when viewed by candlelight. Now we come to the High Renaissance, which starts around the year 1500. You've seen Da Vinci's game-changing Mona Lisa, and this is of equal importance to Last Supper. It's generally regarded to be the first major work of the High Renaissance that starts around 1500. This is Michelangelo's centerpiece of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. God and Adam touch fingers. God breathes life into humankind. And then this is Raphael's School of Athens. You know, if I had to pick my favorite painting of the whole lot, it would be this one. This is a gathering of great philosophers and scholars of history, but it's imaginary because most of these artists scholars didn't know each other. They were born hundreds of years apart, with the exception of Plato and Aristotle.
A-P. All right. Okay, honey.
I can't mute that person. It's more if someone would chat her up. Okay, so this is Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle was his student, and Plato believed that inspiration came from divine inspiration. Knowledge came from divine inspiration. And so you notice he gestures upward. Aristotle believed that knowledge came from worldly experience. And you see his palm is down. This painting, first of all, is brilliant with perspective. You've got this stage-like portion for these figures in the front. And then you have this dome. And as you look, everything recedes. The arches recede, the pillars, the column, the figures. Over here, we've got Socrates, the father of modern philosophy, born 100 years before Aristotle. And look at this fellow here. He's saying, come on, look over here. You got to see this. This is Euclid explaining his theory of fluid displacement to Pythagoras, 300 years his senior. And look at Pythagoras' students looking over his shoulder to see what he's writing. This is Heraclitus, a great philosopher. He is the image of Michelangelo. And I should say that Raphael learned the intricacies of perspective from Da Vinci. And Plato is the image of Da Vinci. This is Diogenes. Imagine the arguments that Heraclitus and Diogenes would have. Over here, bending down, is Euclid with a caliper, teaching geometry to these children. This is Ptolemy with his back toward us, math and astrology. Facing him is Zoroaster, born 1,000 years before these scholars and philosophers. And then over here, we've got another group debating, discussing, exchanging ideas. And when I see this painting and think about it, I envision a wave of knowledge and information being generated. And each successive group reinforces the previous. And we've got this atmosphere of knowledge and learning and truth just pervading this whole dome. And my allegory for the painting is the pursuit of knowledge, the accumulation of wisdom, and the absolute joy of learning. And then this is Titian, Bacchus and Ariadne, with his very expensive lapis lazuli blue color, famous for his pinks and reds. And then much of the painting is Bacchus's tribe of satyrs and animals and other merrymakers. The Baroque artistic movement followed the Renaissance. It was a natural evolution. They maintained Renaissance principles, but they added drama, chiaroscuro contrast, and except for Caravaggio, they moved away from biblical and went toward portraiture, still life, and landscape. Mm. The leader of the Baroque is Caravaggio. And this is St. Francis of Assisi in Excelsis. This is an important painting because it's the very first painting Caravaggio did of a religious scene. The story is that Francis wanted to experience Christ's pain in a very bloody and violent scene. Christ's stigmata is transferred to Assisi, Francis of Assisi, and he faints from joy and pain. Caravaggio ignores the violence. The only wound we see is the wound in Francis's side, and we see Francis in ecstasy, awakening in the comforting arms of this wonderful angel figure. You can see this painting firsthand at the Athenaeum. You can walk right up to it. You can stand 2 feet away from it, and you can imagine Caravaggio standing next to you as he creates. Diego Velázquez is regarded by many to be the greatest of Spanish artists. And this is his masterpiece, Las Meninas. Las Meninas means the handmaidens, and they are attending Princess Margarita. She is the firstborn of King Philip IV of Spain. The artist is Velázquez. That's a self-portrait. He was a favorite. He was a member of the royal court for 36 years. And at first glance, the princess appears to be his subject. But the conundrum is when we look at this column with the mirror, and there we see the royal couple standing back here with us. And Velázquez appears to be looking back here with us. And so the question becomes, has he been painting the royal couple and the princess has interrupted? Or has he been painting the princess and the royal couple has been watching him, something that they did? When asked, Velázquez said he preferred to let the viewer interpret the painting. But come on, this thing is so real. Isn't your first impulse to say, well, why don't we just go around to the front and look? At this time in Spain, actors and musicians ranked high, and artists not so much. So Philip's first request for Velázquez's knighthood was rejected. Philip persisted. He got papal permission, and Velázquez was knighted shortly before his death. And you can see in Las Meninas, he wears the red cross of knighthood. Now, the problem is this painting was done 3 years before he was knighted. Now, Philip was a painter of sorts. He had a good teacher for 36 years. And legend has it that the king himself painted the cross on Velázquez. The worst thing that happened to the princess was that she grew. She's 5 years old in this painting. She had an arranged marriage at age 14. She suffered 2 miscarriages. She bore 4 children, only one of which survived infancy. She died at age 21. The other parts of this composition include 2 well-dressed dwarves, which were a normal part of a royal household. This is a nanny. This is a bodyguard. This is the Queen's Chamberlain. There's a dog here. Continuing with the evolutionists of the Baroque period, this is Peter Paul Rubens, The Judgment of Paris. His voluptuous nudes caused the term Rubenesque to be coined. The story here is that Zeus, the king of gods, has asked Paris, a mortal, to award this golden apple to the most beautiful of these 3 goddesses. He awards the apple to Aphrodite, goddess of love, and signs his own death warrant because he angers Athena, goddess of war, and Paris is subsequently killed in battle. These are the Greek version of the goddesses. This is Hera, the queen of the goddess with the tiara. Rubens was a trusted diplomat, and his work to maintain peace between Spain and England resulted in his separately being knighted by Philip IV of Spain and Charles I of England. The next painter in the Baroque movement is Rembrandt van Rijn, and his self-portraits are a kind of autobiography. This one was painted when he was about age 60. Here's a painting earlier in his career. He painted himself flamboyantly in his younger days. Here in this later painting, he shows dignity and strength and tiredness. He had a tough life. 2 daughters and a son died in infancy. His wife died at age 29. He often lived beyond his means. He barely escaped bankruptcy. The most telling feature of these self-portraits is his eyes. If you look at the younger painting, his eyes are bright, inquisitive. In the later painting, they're in shadows, no highlights. He's stoic, showing the weight of life's vicissitudes. The last painting of the Baroque movement is Johannes Vermeer, Girl with a Pearl Earring. There are only 35 Vermeer works known, but they're all masterpieces, and they all have this one quality of stillness. His paintings always cause introspection, always cause a peacefulness. You see a lot of that in Edward Hopper's work. Other artists who are influenced by Vermeer are Cézanne, Seurat, and Dali. There are no game changers in Baroque. Baroque was a natural evolution from Renaissance, but the Baroque artists are evolutionists extraordinaire. Following art movement is Watteau the Rebel. Now bear in mind, we've had 400 years of, starting with Giotto, we've had 400 years of pre-Renaissance, Renaissance, Baroque, serious, dramatic, meaningful, deep thought art. Along comes the rebel, Jean-Antoine Watteau, and he says, enough of this seriousness, let's party, enter the Rococo art movement, sometimes known as Rococo but it featured playful themes. It was in response to the pomp and grandeur of Renaissance and Baroque. Featured playful themes, risque trysts, casual settings, soft brushstrokes. It usually featured a rich and rolling landscape. This is Watteau's Festival of Love. It shows French aristocrats on the island of Kythera, birthplace of Venus. She's the Roman goddess of love. We see her figure up on the right. See a nice landscape here. It shows pairs of aristocrats in various stages of amour. Gainsborough is considered one of the more conventional Rococo artists. He favored landscapes, but they didn't sell. So he had to do commissioned portraits, and he didn't like it. He said, "I'm sick of portraits. I wish I could run off to a village and do nothing but paint landscapes." Well, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews is a commissioned portrait, but you'll notice 2/3 of the painting is a landscape. And then the French leader of Rococo is Jean-Honoré Fragonard, and this is the swing, his masterpiece. And in the true spirit of Rococo, this is a scene of infidelity and illicit love. We see a husband here swinging his wife with ropes attached to her swing. In the foliage, Susan, that's you. In the brush, we see her lover, who gets a peek under her dress. This pink shoe and this dainty foot adds another erotic layer to the painting. And Fragonard's use of light here is interesting. The coquettish wife and her lover are in the light, and as is so often the case, her husband is in the dark. The death of Marat, neoclassicism. With the advent of the French Revolution, paintings such as this were looked at with distaste. They were thought to be an affront to public morality. In fact, the first owner of this painting was guillotined. So you might say that the Rococo artist was cut short by the French Revolution of 1792. And that brought a return to the classics. The neoclassicist movement went back to the principles of Renaissance, tempered by Greek and Roman antiquity, but the thought was they would restore dignity and seriousness and honorable emotions like patriotism and loyalty. Jacques-Louis David was the leader of the neoclassical movement, and the death of Marat is an interesting masterpiece. He had many great paintings, but this one was unique because of its political and propaganda overtone. Jean-Paul Marat, shown here, was a politician who was part of Robespierre's reign of terror. He was personally responsible for hundreds of French aristocrats being guillotined. He had a debilitating skin condition, and he often worked from medicinal baths. He was assassinated in one of his baths, and David was asked to do a portrait in honor of him. And so, where the political and propaganda comes in, David took a lot of license here. He removed the unsightly discoloration and blemishes from Marat's skin. He made his 50-year-old face look boyish. He changed the note to have patriotic phrases. He minimized the unsightly wound. He didn't show the large amount of blood that was at the scene. And he painted Marat's right arm to resemble Christ's arm as he was lowered from the cross. He painted Marat as a martyr. Marat's assassin was guillotined. And this went over well with the rulers at the time. It served David well to show this politician in this most favorable light. However, when the excesses of Robespierre's reign of terror became known, both Marat's and David's star faded, and David was even imprisoned after Robespierre was deposed. But artists have a way of coming out on their feet, and David eventually became Napoleon's favorite painter. About 50 years into neoclassicism, the Romanticist movement came about, and these artists were almost opposed to neoclassicism, adding more drama, more emotion. Eugène Delacroix being a leader of the Romanticist movement, and this is his famous Liberty Leading the People. And this painting is a symbol of insurrection, powerful symbol. The event is the successful Parisian uprising of 1830. And here we see the figurative Lady Liberty holding a French tricolor in one hand and a musket in the other. Her weight is on her front foot. They are at the top of the barricades. They have reached, and they are ready to go forward to victory. The fluttering flag, the billowing skirt adds movement. Her followers are all members of society. This is an aristocrat in a top hat with a rifle. This is a factory worker with a sword. This is a student wearing a bicorn. So a wounded fighter. And this is a boy brandishing pistols. It's a great moment. You can almost hear the gunfire, smell the smoke, imagine La Marseillaise playing in the background as they move forward. This painting also was an inspiration for Victor Hugo in his novel Les Miserables. In fact, the heroic boy, Gavroche, who leaves the barricades in the novel and goes and forages ammunition for the rebels and is killed, was inspired by this. And notice 50 years before or 30 years before the novel was written, Delacroix painted him with an ammunition pouch. The next Romanticist is Francisco de Goya. And this is the 3rd of May. On the 2nd of May, the Spanish rebels conducted an uprising against the occupying French forces. The uprising was quelled, and the next day marked a savage retribution. On the 3rd of May, hundreds of Spanish subjects were rounded up and paraded before a French firing squad. And here we see a portion of that. The light from this lantern illuminates this crucifixion-like pose. You see there's a stigmata in his palm. This individual is defiant, fists. This monk is praying. And the idea being the indiscriminate and random selection of victims for this firing squad. And look at the firing squad. Automatons, machine-like. Maybe Goya's message here is that no thinking human being would take part in such a massacre. And then another Romanticist is Joseph Mallard William Turner. And he just was a master at fusing color and light. The subject here, the Temeraire, was a ship of the Royal Navy and turned the tide at the historic Battle of Trafalgar, where the outnumbered British fleet conquered Napoleon's fleet and thwarted his invasion. The ship became a favorite of the citizens. It was renamed the Fighting Temeraire. She served the Navy for 33 more years. But steamship-powered warships caused the wooden-hulled ships to be sold to foundries. And so this is the Temeraire's last voyage. She was towed to a port, hauled up on the mud, and broken up for scrap. And this painting captures the full range of Romanticism. You've got this wonderful sunset, typical Turner sunset, taking up more than a third of the painting. And then you have this proud and stately ship, which commands respect. The ugly steam-powered tugboat represents the forces of evil. And the impending death of an old sailor causes sadness. It's an allegory of life. You do your best, you fight the good fight, you earn a reputation, you go quietly into your sunset with dignity. This painting has been voted England's favorite by the English. John Constable was one of the landscape romanticists. This is the hay wain, which means a large cart. And it's a stunning landscape. It's got everything. And it was said that Constable painted nature's portraits. But Turner painted nature's poetry. The Romanticist and neoclassical movements had pretty much run their course. The realist artist came about, and these artists painted subjects that were not idealized. They painted ordinary people doing natural things. Gustave Courbet was a leader, an early leader of the realist movement, and this is the artist's studio. On the left of the painting is the world of the commonplace. You have the rich, the poor, the exploiters, and the exploited. And on the right, you have Baudelaire's, Courbet's friends, the poet Baudelaire, the writer Champfleury. The nude represents truth. And notice that the figures in his studio are not the subjects of his painting. He's painting a landscape from memory. Edouard Manet was a leading realist and also a bridge between realism and impressionism. And this is Olympia, which caused a major scandal when it was exhibited at the French Salon. Now, nudes were not controversial in French art. They were commonplace. But Olympia was just a little too modern, a little too real, and too much of an affront to public morality. Remember when we said artists can be influenced by artists centuries in the past? And here's an example. This is Manet's Olympia, and this is Titian's Venus of Urbino, 300 years previous. But Titian gives us this idealized, voluptuous goddess with a chaste background. And Manet gives us this naked prostitute with an orchid in her hair, a choker, a bracelet, slippers. The flowers are a present from one of her previous suitors. Titian gives us this brown dog of loyalty. Manet gives us this black cat of infidelity. The model for Olympia, Victorine Meurent, was herself an accomplished artist and had paintings displayed at the Salon. And then we have James Abbott McNeill, Whistler, He was born in the United States at age 21. He moved to France and lived in Europe for the rest of his life. He was a unique evolutionist. In fact, the first cut I made of this, I had him as a game changer. He was unique in that he made major contributions to multiple genres. He had vision. And this slide tries to capture that vision of his contribution. Of course, Whistler the Realist, his iconic arrangement in gray and black, #1. Whistler the Aestheticist, this magnificent peacock room at the Smithsonian. You'll not find a better work of aestheticism anywhere. Whistler the Impressionist. This painting was the subject of a famous court case. And during the trial, Whistler said this painting was not a specific place on the 10. He said, this painting is just an expression of excitement and celebration. And then here we have a Mark Rothko abstract expressionist color field painting and a Whistler Nocturne. This is 19th century realism. At the turn of the century, it was overshadowed by a bunch of disparate art movements, but it regained momentum in the 20th century through American artists such as Grant Wood and Edward Hopper. Now let's look at Nighthawks. And this is a wide painting, it's 5 feet wide. And you can see the outside is dark and deserted, that building in the background is dark. And even though it is a large painting, the subjects are crammed into this narrow little oval, and there isn't any communication. There's no interaction, even though the couple is almost holding hands. And this is that Vermeer stillness that pervades Hopper's work, which leads us to Impressionism. And these artists tried to capture the impression of a passing moment. They experimented with light and color. These paintings never lose popularity. They always command high prices at private sales. Claude Monet was the best known and pioneer of Impressionism, and he is a game changer. He was the best known of French Impressionism. Probably today is probably the world's best known painter. This particular painting caused Monet to crystallize his thoughts about this new style. He was painting the port of Le Havre from his apartment window, and when he finished it, his assistants asked him what was the name. And he said, well, it didn't look like a port, and it didn't look like Le Havre. I said, call it Impression of a Sunrise. Well, the name stuck, and the artists and the artworks became known as Impressionists and Impressionism. Monet lived to be 86. He painted up until the end. He outlived all of the original Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists. Edgar Degas was one of the early Impressionists. He had little truck with landscapes, no use for painting outside. His main subjects were racehorses and ballet dancers. And almost half his work are paintings of ballet dancers at the Paris Opera. This is one such scene. They're on a break. That is a real ballet master, Jules Perrault, overseeing this. And Degas' work with these ballet dancers is always a masterpiece of composition and perspective. You can actually see this painting firsthand. It's on loan from the Musée d'Orsay to the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. It's part of their exhibition on Degas at the Opera. It runs until October 12th. This painting is there. All we have to do is get there. Mary Cassatt was an American painter who spent most of her life in France. She had numerous works exhibited at the Paris Salon. And Edgar Degas, her friend and mentor, invited her to exhibit with the Impressionists. And you can see the Impressionism here. Sometimes she borders on realism. Her facial features may look like realism, but the artwork is Impressionism. You can see in the water, the ducks, especially the boat and the clothes. Post-Impressionists can be thought of as the next generation of Impressionists, and where the Impressionists were very similar. Their styles were pretty compatible. The Post-Impressionists were not. Everyone was different. Every painting had a personal touch. It was more cerebral, more unique. Georges Seurat was probably the earliest of the Post-Impressionists. This is Sunday on l'Orangeat. It's pointillist, where he uses little dots of paint to form the actual scene. But look at the figures. Doesn't it look like a sculpture garden? They look like statues. There's a little bit of movement, but mainly the only movement is that woman with the red parasol and the child walking toward us. Van Gogh was a post-impressionist, and of course, this is Starry Night, which has been called many things. It's been called hallucinatory, visionary, violent. There are numerous interpretations. Some are religious. The best part is that we can make our own interpretation and be comfortable with it because there are so many different interpretations. This is a stop in your tracks moment at the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan. It was for me. It's really a miracle the way you see this thing up close and the impact that it has. Van Gogh sold only one painting during his lifetime, but now, of course, his works all upwards of $100 million. Which brings us to Paul Cézanne, a game changer. Regarded as the father of modern art by many. The Large Bathers is considered to be his most famous work. It was started in 1906. It was on his easel when he died. It was unfinished and remains unfinished. Composition. The trees form this unnatural arch. That make a triangle. And then you have two more triangles, one here and one here. The triangle on the right is more populated, but the one on the left has that standing figure moving, so it balances it out. And look at how the bodies of the figures parallel the arch of the trees, here, 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 here. And also, you see these elongated limbs which join the two triangles, cradle the piece, focus your attention on the middle water feature and those images going away. The color is funny. It's at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Once again, is a commanding presence, had the same impact on me as did Starry Night. And when you look at it quick, it looks like it could be a watercolor or a pastel. It's really oil on the canvas. But the painting, it pervades the arch, the figures, the sky, the water. It looks like everything is made out of some mysterious substance, all the same. And one last point, we can see that he really hadn't made up his mind here. as to whether this painting, this is the arms of this woman kneeling, or the back of the legs of this woman walking away. Cézanne, also considered to be the root of abstract expressionism that followed. It took the public a while to appreciate Cézanne, but not his fellow artists. Artists who paid money for Cézanne's bather paintings include Pissarro, Degas, Monet, Renoir, Gauguin, and Matisse. So you could say he was a painter as well. Fauve is a wild beast. These artists used wild colors in wildly unconventional ways. Fauvism was a jarring interruption to the smooth progression of art. It was led by the rebel Henri Matisse, and this is the dance. You have warm dancers against a very cool background. The dancing is uninhibited, liberating. At this time, Matisse had an ongoing rivalry with his friend, Picasso, as to the leadership of the artistic avant-garde. And this was Matisse's bid. Surgery for abdominal cancer left him an invalid. And here he became a rebel in a different way. He refused to give in to being incapacitated. And he conjured up pre-painted collages of cutouts. And these are exhibited in museums and regarded as masterpieces. This is probably his most famous cutout. It is 11 feet tall by 25 feet wide. This is the parakeet, and this is the mermaid. So what do we have? For the parakeet, do we have fruit and jungle foliage? And for the mermaid, do we have sea urchins and seaweed? Or maybe both. Well, if dance isn't enough Fauvism for you, how about composition number 7?
Kandinsky.
From Vasily Kandinsky. And here he is trying to show what music looks like. And so this wild configuration of colors, if you stare at it long enough, we should hear songs. Well, if we set aside this rude interruption of Fauvism, we see Pablo Picasso with his Cubist movement. And this is where everything is reduced to geometric shapes. All views, front, back, side, can somehow be flattened and showed in one view. Everything is merged. Picasso was a game changer. And this is the game-changing painting, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. It shows nude prostitutes in a brothel in Barcelona. It was revolutionary. It was controversial, and it was definitely not traditional European painting. If you notice the color palette being light like that, makes us almost overlook the nudity, and we concentrate on the faces, which then gives personality to these prostitutes. You can also see this at the Museum of Modern Art. Well, poor Henri Matisse. The shock and impact of Les Demoiselles knocked Matisse and Fauvism off the map, effectively ending the Fauvist movement. They only mounted 3 exhibitions, and Picasso was acknowledged to be the leader of the artistic avant-garde, and went on to be one of the most influential painters of the 20th century. Surrealists tried to investigate the nature of dreams and the bizarre and irrational wandering of the mind. Salvador Dali was the leading surrealist. And this is the persistence of memory. And Dali's premise here is that time drives our everyday waking moments. We're late, we're early, we have a deadline, we've got to get here, we've got to go there. But in dreams, time becomes elastic. And so he signifies that with these melting watches. And if you'll notice, the minute hand of all these watches is right around 12. You see the bottom is at 6 here, so it would be 12 o'clock up here. And that signifies death. And then this figure with the closed eye and the large nose is a Dali self-portrait. Pablo Picasso had many phases, and surrealism was one such phase. This is Guernica, and if Picasso hadn't been a game changer for Cubism, he would be a game changer for surrealism. The story here is the Spanish Civil War, and the small town of Guernica was obliterated by German bombs. Picasso then painted this as a protest against the indiscriminate massacre of civilians. And this is a nightmare. And you can see pain, chaos, dismemberment, black and white. It's large. It's 11 feet high and 25 feet long. Surrealism had an influence on Georgia O'Keeffe. Ram's Head with Hollyhock is a combination of her 3 favorite subjects: New Mexico landscapes, and flowers, and skeletal remains. Jimson Weed is famous for 2 reasons. One, it's the largest of her surrealist works, almost 4 feet square. But the second point being, at this painting, set the record for a price paid for a painting by a woman artist, $44 million in 2014. And that record still stands today. The sad commentary is that in 2014, $44 million was the highest price. The second highest price for a painting by a woman artist was $11 million. The amount a male artist gets paid for painting a soup can. So it's been a tough slog for women artists. Some consider O'Keeffe's large-scale paintings to have erotic implications. She said no. And some critics of the time said no. I don't know why we don't believe her. She said she painted large so that people would stop and look at it and see the detail. You can also see the influence of surrealism on secessionist artists like Gustav Klimt and Edvard Munch. This is The Kiss. And if it's a bad kiss, the scream. Which brings us to abstract expressionism. These artists, based in New York, used unconventional methods to display emotion. These paintings are cerebral, often lacking a subject. The 3 stars of the movement were Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Willem de Kooning, and each contributed to abstract expressionism and the evolution of it in their own way. However, Pollock was one of the earliest. He was the most famous. His art commands the highest prices. He is the game changer. This is one of his more famous works, Autumn Rhythm number 30. And this is one of his action paintings. He throws canvas on the floor and spatters, drips, and swirls paint onto it. There is no subject. The edges of the painting are just as important as the center. Now, it's hard to talk about Jackson Pollock without talking about Lee Krasner, his wife. After his death, she managed his estate. She burnished his image. But what's sometimes overlooked is that she was an excellent abstract expressionist in her own right, and her paintings have continued to increase in value. She was a student of Hans Hofmann. She developed a unique style. And in 2019, one of her paintings set a record for her sales of 11.7 million, which made it the 6th most expensive painting by a woman artist. So we've had some progress. In 2014, $11 million got you second place. And here in 2019, 11 million is 6th. So the women artists are making headway. Here's a factoid for you. Both of these artists have a painting at the Wadsworth Atheneum. This is Pollock's number 9, one of his drip paintings. And this is Krasner's Broken Gray. And in her paint, this is a collage. She uses ripped portions of discarded artworks. She pastes them onto a board and then binds them with color, with paint. Now, isn't that a great pairing? And that Krasner will pull you in. Well, here is a factoid. A movie was made about Jackson Pollock, and the co-stars were Ed Harris and Marcia Gay Harden. And they both were nominated for Oscars. Harris was nominated for Best Actor, and Harden was nominated for Best Supporting Actress. Here is a scene from the movie. And Harris didn't win the Oscar, but she did. So chalk one up for Lee Krasner. This gives you an idea of the scale of Autumn Rhythm number 30. And think back to Guernica. That painting measured, or this painting measures 9 feet tall by 17 feet wide. Guernica measured 11 feet tall by 25 feet wide, a third larger. Can you imagine the impact of the size of that painting? Well, if Pollock's action paintings make you want to dance, then Mark Rothko's color field paintings make you want to stop and think. They hang in space, the colors bleed. Willem de Kooning found a way to fuse surrealism, cubism, and expressionism. This is Woman. It's certainly not a Rothko action color field painting. It's not a Pollock action painting. I guess it's representational abstraction. There is a woman there, and she is a fearsome. Well, right about this time, the mid-50s, the art world was awash in abstraction, and the assorted detritus of some other wacky art movements. And pop art popped up. This was a rebuttal to rampant abstract expressionism. The rebel was Andy Warhol, of course, who had the chutzpah to sell paintings of soup cans. He also did paintings of celebrities like Jackie Kennedy, Elizabeth Taylor, and Marilyn Monroe. She was the epitome of sex appeal and glamour. And Warhol distorted her figure to criticize society's pursuit of those ideal traits. Warhol's work is pleasant, pleasing, fun, inexpensive. The highest price paid for one of Warhol's work is $105 million, which you would probably pay for a Van Gogh or a Monet. Roy Lichtenstein, by the mid-60s, was nationally known as another leader in the pop art movement. His signature painting is Wham! Wasn't that a great fly-in? Let's do it again. You ready? His signature painting is, all together now, Wham! This established Lichtenstein as the leader of the comic art movement. He chased Warhol away from comic art, but Warhol did okay with the rest of the pop icon. This is the final movement. It's optical art. It uses color and illusion, having a hypnotic and psychological effect. This is To a Summer's Day. Bridget Riley is 87. She lives in London. And you don't have to stare at this painting long to see it start to move. In summary, we have seen 15 art movements over 700 years, 54 paintings, 46 artists, of which 6 are game changers, 3 are rebels. Conclusion. The history of art has been an orderly progression, other than some hiccups and tangents along the way. Most of the movements have evolved, each building on another. Progress has been steady. The bar of excellence has continued to move incrementally higher. And you don't have to be a game changer to make a difference, which applies to everyday life as well, doesn't it? So let's hear it for the game changers and the paintings that change the game. Let's hear it for the rebels. And let's hear it for the rest. Somebody out there, give me an amen. And this concludes the Great Painters Lecture Series. It's been fun. Thanks for joining me on the journey.